think there were not many people who understood just how broad his interests were and how supportive he was of an astonishingly wide range of organisations.
Meghan expected resistance. She expected cold shoulders, carefully worded statements, perhaps even another uncomfortable season of royal silence. What she did not expect was a decision so sweeping that it appeared to erase every possible path back into the ceremonial life she once occupied. One message arrived, one name stood behind it, and suddenly weddings, memorials, jubilees, state receptions, and family gatherings all seemed to have the same answer: no. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Meghan read the communication once, then again, searching for some narrow conditions she might have missed. The wording was brutally clear. In this dramatized account, Princess Anne had ordered that Meghan be excluded from invitations and ceremonial planning for every major royal gathering under her direct influence, including family commemorations, formal Windsor events, and occasions reserved for senior working royals. A working royal is a family member who officially represents the monarch through public duties, and that distinction suddenly carried enormous emotional weight. This was not one missed event, it was a wall. Meghan felt the meaning settle slowly. Years of separation between California and Britain had already turned family relationships into something fragile, shaped by public arguments, private disappointment, and competing loyalties. She had learned to expect distance. But this felt different, because it transformed personal tension into a standing rule. The message did not say, "for now." It did not name an end date. It simply closed one door after another. Harry watched her reach the final paragraph for a second time. She lowered the page and looked directly at him. "Every gathering?" she asked. He did not answer immediately. That hesitation was enough. He was angry for her, yet he also understood his aunt well enough to know Anne rarely made sweeping decisions without deciding she could defend them. Meghan noticed something else, and it cut deeper than the exclusion itself. No senior member of the household appeared to have objected. No correction followed, no urgent call arrived from Charles. The king's silence mattered because he remained the person with enough authority to challenge the arrangement, while Anne's action carried force precisely because nobody had stopped her. The shock was no longer simply that Anne had acted. It was that others seemed prepared to let her decision stand. Meghan could challenge the rule, but before she could understand how to fight it, she had to face the harder truth. Anne was not acting inside a vacuum, and the people surrounding the crown each had something deeply personal to lose. And that realization changed everything about what came next. Behind every royal decision sits a human calculation, and this one carries scars belonging to more than one person. Meghan sees rejection. Harry sees another bridge collapsing beneath him. Charles sees a family dispute threatening the institution he spent decades waiting to lead. Anne sees something entirely different, a boundary that should have been drawn long ago. Their motives do not align, but their pain now occupies the same room. Anne had built her reputation inside this dramatized account around discipline, routine, and duty before comfort. She preferred decisions to explanations, and that instinct now placed her directly against Meghan. A working royal means a family member who officially represents the monarch through public duties, and Meghan no longer held that role. Yet marriage, family history, and global attention still tied her permanently to the crown, making every exclusion feel larger than a missing invitation. Meghan remained seated while Harry paced across the room, anger pulling him from one thought to another. She finally asked him to stop. Can she be persuaded? The question was simple, but he could not answer it quickly. He knew his aunt was not impulsive. He also knew that when Anne believed duty had been compromised, emotion rarely changed her course. His silence hurt Meghan more than a direct refusal might have. Charles felt the pressure from another direction. He wanted to protect his son from another public fracture. But reversing Anne risked reopening disputes the household had spent years trying to contain. The king understood that family pain could become institutional chaos when every ceremony turned into a test of loyalty. He disliked the exclusion, yet he feared the consequences of undoing it even more. Anne had been careful. She did not attack Meghan publicly, strip away family ties, or release a statement designed to humiliate her. Instead, she closed ceremonial doors one by one, limiting access without turning the decision into open warfare. That restraint made the move colder, because it suggested planning rather than anger. William's silence carried its own weight. The prince neither celebrated Anne's decision nor challenged it, and Meghan noticed. He had enough standing to question the arrangement, yet he chose not to disturb it. For Harry, that silence felt like another loss. For Anne, it looked like permission. And beneath every carefully controlled response sat the same fear, that one wrong move could turn a private family wound into another public royal crisis again. The exclusion had arrived in one message, but its origin lay months earlier, in a gathering where a brief exchange changed Anne's view completely. What happened there would become the point of no return. Sometimes, they begin with a sentence spoken too softly, in a room crowded enough for everyone to pretend they heard nothing. Months before Meghan learned she would be blocked from future gatherings, one private exchange at Windsor changed Anne's view completely. It lasted less than 5 minutes. No cameras recorded it. No announcement followed. Yet in this dramatized story, that conversation became the seed of everything that came next, and the family would remember forever. Meghan had already sensed the strain around family occasions. Each gathering seemed to carry a second argument beneath the official purpose. Who stood where, who entered first, who was included in the central group, and whether Harry's presence would revive tensions. A commemorative service, meaning a formal royal event held to honor a person or important moment, should have been about remembrance. Instead, Anne watched ceremony become tangled in questions of access, precedence, seating, press attention, and family grievance. Meghan waited until the Windsor reception had thinned before approaching her. Harry remained nearby, watching closely, while Anne understood immediately that this was not casual conversation. Meghan asked why she and her husband had been placed outside the central senior royal receiving group. She told Anne that sidelining was not neutral. "It sends a message," she said. "People see exactly where you put us." Anne listened without interrupting. Then she set down her untouched glass and answered calmly. "Ceremony," she said, "could not be reorganized around personal hurt." Meghan heard dismissal in that sentence. She believed she had raised a concern about dignity, only to have it reduced to emotion. Harry saw the change in her face and knew the exchange had gone badly before she even turned toward him. Anne drew a different conclusion. To her, the confrontation confirmed her fear. Every future appearance involving Meghan and Harry could become a negotiation over status rather than purpose. She did not demand Meghan's removal that night. That would have been too easy to challenge. Later, Anne requested a single review of future event protocols, guest categories, and ceremonial eligibility, instead of allowing arguments to erupt occasion by occasion. Protocols were simply the agreed rules governing how formal royal events are organized and who takes part. By combining those rules into one framework, she began turning a personal dispute into a system. Months later, when Meghan learned that the Windsor exchange had been the trigger, clarification was no longer enough. She wanted Anne face to face. What began as a quiet disagreement over position and belonging was about to become something far more dangerous. Two women meeting without handlers, each convinced the other had misunderstood what the crown demanded. There are moments when royal restraint becomes impossible to maintain, and this is one of them. Meghan enters the conversation determined not to plead. Anne enters determined not to retreat. Neither raises her voice at first. Neither needs to. Years of accumulated resentment, disappointment, and suspicion sit between them. Then Meghan says the one thing Anne cannot ignore. "You don't get to decide my place in this family." Meghan had insisted on meeting face to face because she refused to let the restriction be reduced to messages passed through staff. Anne agreed for the opposite reason. She believed a decision this serious should be defended directly, not hidden behind courtiers. Courtiers are royal household staff who help organize official duties, advice, and ceremony, and removing them from the room stripped away every protective layer. Now there was nowhere for either woman to retreat. Meghan asked the question without softening it. Had Anne personally instructed organizers to remove her from future major royal guest planning? Anne answered yes. One word: no apology. Meghan pushed her chair back but did not stand. She accused Anne of turning years of family pain into institutional punishment, arguing that reconciliation becomes almost impossible when every ceremonial door is closed before a conversation can even begin. Anne placed both hands flat on the table. She told Meghan that family connection and ceremonial participation were not the same thing. The monarchy, she said, could not keep renegotiating its structure whenever private relationships deteriorated. Ceremonial participation simply means taking part in formal royal occasions, where rank, duty, and public role determine who stands where and why. To Anne, that distinction protected the institution. To Meghan, it sounded like a carefully polished way of saying she no longer belonged. Meghan's anger sharpened when Anne refused to soften the decision. Pain, the princess said, did not make a rule wrong. Then came the revelation that changed the entire confrontation. Anne disclosed, through this private conversation, that she had already consulted Charles about the broader implications before the protocol was put in place. The king knew enough to intervene. Anne let that truth settle before adding the sentence Meghan feared most. Nobody with sufficient authority had instructed her to stop. Charles had not overturned it. No senior figure had forced a review. The silence surrounding the decision was no longer accidental. Meghan understood then that she was not confronting one stubborn relative. She was facing a boundary the wider royal hierarchy had accepted. Anne had closed the door, but others had chosen not to reopen it. And once that truth surfaced, attention shifted from the woman who made the decision to the people powerful enough to reverse it. Power inside a monarchy does not always announce itself with signatures or proclamations. Sometimes power is silence, the absence of an objection when everyone knows an objection could change everything. Anne may have delivered the decision, but its true weight comes from the fact that Charles does not reverse it. William does not challenge it, and the household begins behaving as though the matter is already settled. Charles read the briefing slowly, then removed his glasses and left the pages untouched on the desk. The document summarized Meghan's objections and the consequences of Anne's restriction. A royal briefing is simply an internal summary prepared to help senior members understand a decision, its risks, and possible responses. The king knew his sister did not possess limitless constitutional authority. Her influence came from decades of trust, ceremonial discipline, and a reputation for enforcing boundaries others hesitated to draw. Charles finally spoke after several minutes. He hated the idea of another family exclusion, he admitted, because every closed door pushed Harry further from the center of family life. Yet he feared something else more. One high-profile appearance involving Meghan could reopen arguments over status, security, seating, press attention, and every unresolved grievance that had followed the family for years. By refusing to countermand Anne, the monarch gave her decision practical force without ever publicly endorsing it. William approached the problem with colder logic. The prince believed predictable rules might cause pain now, but prevent greater chaos later. Repeated exceptions, he argued privately, only created new expectations, and those expectations became fresh conflicts when the next request was denied. He did not celebrate Meghan's exclusion, but he also did not believe constant negotiation could continue forever. Anne understood exactly how silence worked. She never demanded that Charles or William publicly approve her plan. That was deliberate. Public approval would force them to own the controversy. Quiet non-interference allowed the decision to survive while keeping responsibility blurred. She had created something stronger than a statement, a system others could live with. Aides began rewriting guest protocols around categories instead of individual names. Guest protocols are the rules used to decide who is invited, where they are placed, and what role they hold during formal occasions. Meghan therefore did not need to be rejected repeatedly. The category itself could exclude her automatically. Then, the machinery moved. The next major invitation was prepared, and one expected name was missing. The palace had transformed one woman's decision into procedure, and procedure has a brutal quality. It becomes real the moment the next invitation arrives, and Harry discovers exactly how far the new reality reaches. The true cost of exclusion is rarely felt when the rule is written. It arrives later, in smaller moments: the missing envelope, the separate schedule, the invitation addressed to one person instead of two. Harry had defended Meghan through storms far louder than this. But when the first major royal invitation arrived, under Anne's new framework, even he was unprepared for the emotional precision of what had changed. Harry opened the envelope slowly and read the wording twice. The invitation was for a major family commemoration at Windsor, a formal gathering held to honor a significant royal anniversary or memory, and he had been privately permitted to attend as the king's son. Meghan's name was nowhere on the card. He checked inside the envelope again, then turned it over, as though another page might somehow be hidden behind it. Meghan saw his face before he said anything. She understood immediately. The new protocol had separated family access from ceremonial participation, meaning Harry could still be welcomed in one capacity, while she remained outside another. That distinction mattered, because it turned exclusion into something precise rather than total. She was still connected to the family, yet she was being kept away from the public rituals that defined royal belonging. Harry looked angry, but the anger did not point in one direction. He blamed Anne for drawing the boundary, yet Charles's silence now hurt more because the king had the power to challenge it. Meghan told him quietly that she would not ask him to stay away. Still, both understood the cost. If he attended without her, some would see it as acceptance. If he refused, another family ceremony would become part of the conflict. Anne rejected a final request for an exception. Through a private written response, she made her reasoning clear. The purpose of the rule was to stop every major event from becoming a fresh negotiation. She would not build a standing boundary and then dissolve it at the first difficult moment. Charles delivered the harder message in a private conversation with his son. The monarch told Harry that forcing Meghan's attendance now would risk creating a confrontation during the ceremony itself, and he would not allow the gathering to become another battlefield. Harry listened, frustrated, because his father was no longer merely staying silent. He was defending the outcome. That changed everything. Harry could attack the palace publicly, deepen the rupture, and turn the invitation into another global dispute. Or, he could do something far more painful. Anger had carried him this far, but anger could not solve what the empty space exposed. The next move required a son sitting across from his father, with no aides, no statements, and nowhere left to hide. When Harry finally sits opposite Charles, neither man begins with Anne. That is what makes the conversation matter. For once, the argument is not about protocol, headlines, security, hierarchy, or who said what years earlier. It is about exhaustion. A father who believes every decision causes another wound. A son who believes every closed door confirms he no longer belongs. And between them sits Meghan's name, even before either speaks it. Harry had asked for one condition before the meeting began. No Anne, no William, no advisors, no private secretaries. Charles agreed because both men knew official language had become part of the problem. A private secretary is a senior royal aide who helps manage schedules, correspondence, and official duties. But this conversation needed none of that machinery. It needed honesty, and honesty had been missing for far too long. Harry looked at his father and finally said what the invitation had forced him to admit. "I can survive being outside the institution. I cannot keep pretending exclusion does not hurt my family." Charles did not interrupt. The king let the words hang because he understood they were not simply about one ceremony. They were about years of distance, missed moments, and the fear that every new boundary was becoming permanent. Charles answered carefully. He admitted that he had allowed Anne's rule to stand because the constant uncertainty around major gatherings had become unbearable. Every event threatened to reopen old arguments over access, status, attention, and loyalty. The monarch hated what that meant for Harry, but he also believed the family could not keep turning every ceremony into another test of reconciliation. Harry surprised him by conceding something in return. He admitted that he and Meghan had sometimes treated ceremonial access as proof of personal acceptance. That made every invitation feel like love, and every exclusion feel like rejection. He now saw how impossible that burden had become. Charles refused to overturn Anne's restrictions on major formal gatherings. But he made one clear commitment: ceremonial boundaries would not automatically become private family boundaries. The king would not promise Meghan a place at every royal occasion, yet he would not allow protocol to erase personal contact either. Harry accepted the distinction, painfully. He chose not to launch a public battle over the invitations, because forcing ceremonial inclusion would not repair the relationships beneath them. Father and son left the room without victory, but with something rarer: clarity. Outside those walls, however, that private compromise was about to be misunderstood completely, as the world turned Anne's decision into a fierce argument over punishment, loyalty, and who truly belonged inside the royal circle. By morning, a private royal boundary has become public spectacle. The story no longer belongs only to Meghan, Anne, Harry, or Charles. It belongs to presenters, columnists, royal watchers, social media accounts, tourists, and crowds gathered behind palace barriers. Some call Anne ruthless, others call her disciplined. But one image captures the entire controversy: Harry entering Windsor alone, while cameras search instinctively for the woman who is not beside him. Harry knew the story had escaped the palace long before he reached the gates. Multiple upcoming guest arrangements had shown the same pattern, and the press finally connected them. A standing restriction means a rule designed to remain in place across several future occasions rather than apply to one event, and that distinction transformed the dispute from family tension into public policy. Commentators immediately split between those praising consistency and those calling the exclusion unnecessarily severe. One fictional morning newspaper crystallized the argument with a front page screaming, "Anne draws the royal line." The headline sat above photographs of Anne at a formal ceremony and Meghan arriving at an earlier royal engagement. Within hours, the phrase was repeated everywhere. The princess was portrayed either as the guardian of order or the architect of rejection, while Meghan became either the victim of cold protocol or the consequence of unresolved conflict. Harry arrived outside Windsor Castle to a small crowd gathered behind the barriers. Some people waved, others raised phones. Yet the strongest reaction centered on who was missing beside him. The ceremony he had come to attend suddenly seemed secondary. His silence mattered too. Reporters expected anger, perhaps even a public attack on his aunt, but he offered neither. Meghan watched the coverage privately and felt something different from rage. Sadness had replaced the first shock. She saw a deeply complicated family rupture reduced to a contest with winners and losers, and she knew neither description matched the truth. Harry's refusal to strike back publicly only deepened that feeling. His private conversation with Charles had changed him, even if nobody outside the family fully understood why. Anne refused to move. She would not alter the policy because headlines had turned hostile, insisting privately that a rule meant to reduce instability became meaningless if controversy alone could destroy it. Charles, meanwhile, accepted Harry's restraint as proof that the bitter cycle might finally be slowing. The cameras had found their headline, but headlines were never the true ending. The real verdict would be measured in what Meghan accepted, what Anne refused to surrender, and what the monarchy learned after finally drawing a boundary it was prepared to keep. The ending is not reconciliation in the fairy tale sense. Meghan does not suddenly return to the center of royal ceremony. Anne does not apologize for establishing the boundary. Harry does not persuade his family to restore the old arrangement. Yet the story still reaches a conclusion. because something more important finally happens. Everyone stops pretending the relationship can be repaired through invitations alone. Anne keeps the restriction in place for major formal royal gatherings, and the uncertainty that once surrounded every ceremony finally disappears. A ceremonial boundary simply means a clear limit on who may participate in official royal occasions and in what role. Charles, however, follows through on his private promise to Harry. The king separates public royal participation from private family relationships, making certain that institutional distance does not become complete personal estrangement. Meghan receives the first proof quietly. A private family invitation arrives with no ceremonial duty attached, no position to negotiate, and no public role hidden behind it. She studies the message for several seconds before looking toward Harry. "At least this one is actually about family," she says. He understands immediately. For the first time, the invitation is not being treated as a test of status. Meghan still feels the sting of exclusion, but she stops using major royal appearances as the measure of whether she matters. Harry also accepts something difficult. Demanding institutional restoration had kept him trapped inside the very conflict he wanted to escape. Anne reaches her own conclusion. The boundary works because it is predictable, not because it humiliates anyone, and she refuses to turn discipline into punishment. Charles carries regret, because the solution came only after years of pain. The monarch knows clarity cannot erase what was said, missed, or broken. Yet Anne's decision forces the family to separate three things they had repeatedly confused: private family connection, public duty, and ceremonial status. No one truly wins. Meghan carries disappointment. Harry carries divided loyalties. Anne carries responsibility for drawing the line others avoided. Charles carries the knowledge that every boundary has a human cost. But the uncertainty ends. The great royal doors remain closed to Meghan at the ceremonies Anne chose to protect, while the deeper conflict finally stops circling those doors. She recognizes what the boundary means. Harry stops trying to erase it. The crown moves forward with a painful certainty it had avoided for far too long. That is the real verdict. Not triumph, not revenge, but the end of ambiguity. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.